Thanks everybody for joining. I want to make this hopefully a fruitful high signal session. Don't want to waste your time with a bunch of fluff, so I'm just going to try and get right to it. And I'm going to leave a lot of time at the end for questions. And if there are none, we could just end early. Quick introduction on myself. I'm Brian Murray. I'm the co-founder of Cabal. We just graduated YC S21. And I'm also partner COO at Craft Ventures, a VC firm that we started in 2017. And before that, I spent my entire career helping build and run startups. So I've kind of been around the block, and most importantly, I've seen both sides of the operator, founder, and the investor side of the equation. And that was what inspired our product, Cabal, is that experience and the meme that we all know and love. Let me know how I can be helpful. It's tragic, and we're trying to fix it. So this session is really going to be focused on how to squeeze the most juice out of your investors, because if you do it right, they can be transformative, and if you do it wrong, it can be really sad. So let's jump into it. First, I'm going to go, so the agenda, most of you will understand this stuff. I did this, a mini version of the session for our S21 batch, and so the first part was kind of more novel to them, but for most of you, you'll get this, so we'll fly through that. Then we'll break it down into updates, asks. Updates is the push, asks is the pull, gives is a push. That's something that we don't talk about enough, but I think is important to a good relationship. And then monitoring, which doesn't happen today, but I think it definitely should happen. Okay, so starting with understanding your investors. Here's, I drew this up one day because it occurred to me kind of what's happening here? Like in startups, like what's going on? Well, I think there's a pretty, if you distill it down to the most important parts, there's kind of two flows of things. And there's a chain. So the chain is in the middle. You can think of LPs, think of these like endowments or family offices or sort of the origins of capital. They flow into investors, and that can be like VC firms or solo GPs or angels. Those dollars flow into startups, founders are doing the fundraising, and then founders use those dollars largely to pay salaries, and they go to employees. So capital is flowing in sort of that direction. And similarly, I think what else should flow in that direction are offers and help. So if you work with a VC firm, you've probably heard them say like, we can get you discounts on this or that, or whatever it is, or talk to this person who's been around the block. And that's how it should be. Similarly, the other direction is sort of like the work, the labor being done. It's by the employees on behalf of the founders, by the founders on behalf of the investors on behalf of the LPs. That is a brutally capitalistic view of the world. And I understand that there's a lot of nuance that makes that not totally accurate, but I think you get the idea. And similarly, those asks and updates are flowing in that direction. So when I kind of concretize this in my mind, it helped me understand the dynamics of what's at play and what matters to who. All right, so, okay, the next bit, and again, I think this is where most of you all understand this, but important to understand who you're talking to when we're talking about investors. There's a lot of different types, and I would personally, I think of it along two different lines. There's the quote unquote angel or the individual, and that can be of two varieties. One is they're investing their own money. I think that's the purest form of investment, is when someone invests their own dollars. And then the syndicate, where they're really like a mini VC firm. They're raising money from others and then deploying them into startups. On the institutional end, on the right side of the screen, you have the funds are sort of like represented by the bottom two rows, and then their source of funds is represented by the top. So this is where those LPs come in, the endowments, the pension funds, family offices. VCs raise funds, so it's like fund one, fund two, et cetera, from these sources of capital. And then they deploy those funds into startups per fund. And then once they're done with the deployment, they raise the next fund. So they have their own cycle of fundraising. But really, they're just a middleman. And one of the biggest, I guess this was kind of obvious when I was an operator, but I really like realized it deeply when I got into VC, was like the VCs are professional capital allocators. It's not their money that they're investing. It's their job to deploy the capital. And I think it's it's really sad when founders think that the VC is like it's their own money, because it messes with the dynamic. It's not their own money. It's their job to deploy the money. And when you treat it that way, I think it creates a much more healthy, balanced relationship between founder and VC. Okay, going one level deeper on the VC side, important to understand that there's not everybody who works at a VC is the same. There's basically three categories of work or roles at a VC. One, the first is the investors. That's what we all think of as VCs. But there's also more people at these firms usually that are either an operating partner or working in the back office. So the investors are going to be the kind of the most hands-on. They're responsible for, well, actually, let's start at the end. They're measured on returns. Like their job is to generate returns for the firm. And so that means they need to source good deals. They need to pick the right ones. They need to support them so that they win, or help them win. And then they're also responsible for fundraising. The operating partners. This is a group where I think if you're working with a firm that has an operating partner function, they can be super helpful. And a lot of us are kind of like not sure exactly how to engage them. Generally speaking, I would say ask for more help than you need, or try to get help if you think that if you have the bandwidth to ask and you think they can be helpful, because they're entirely measured on founder NPS. Their goal is to make the portfolio founders happy and advocating for the firm and blah, 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 and successful, of course. And if you don't know who's doing what at a firm, just ask, like, are you on the investment team? That'd be like a very benign question to ask people. And they know what you're asking and they'll tell you. Okay, so now getting into the meat of it, updates. I'm guessing most people on this call are doing an update in some form of another. If you're not, I suggest you do it. Not because you want to placate your investors, but because it creates a good operational rhythm for your business and helps with accountability. If you're never updating your investors, then they start to wonder what's going on, and you're not really you're not holding the business accountable to anything. So I think the best part for founders of an update is the accountability that it drives. A lot of people ask, how frequently should I send these out? I think monthly is a good cadence when you're early stage up through the Series A. After that, you can downshift to a quarterly cadence because there's more going on in the business. It becomes too much of a distraction to do something monthly, and also things aren't changing as fast. So quarterly is a much better cadence there. And then when. So I've thought a lot about this. It's so easy to procrastinate on these updates because it requires you to stop what you're doing, kind of downshift, reflect, write something. But I would encourage all of you to get in the habit. If you're in that early stage, seed to Series A, then or if you're at the quarterly stage, do it within the first 7 days of that month or of the end of that quarter. And if you set that precedent, then it sort of becomes habitual and easier to do. How I recommend doing it via email. There's a lot of debate about this. Some people are in Telegram groups with their investors or Slack channels. My view and the way we've built Cabal, our product, is to lean on email. And the reason for that is I think this is it's the lowest common denominator of communication. It also is very well suited for long form updates. And it goes, generally speaking, it goes within the flow of a to-do list for your recipients. If you do it anywhere else, you have all sorts of problems with too many notifications or too fleeting or not a reminder, etc. All right, let me admit a few people here. Okay, and then I also recommend dividing out your update. So you can't do whatever you want, but I think it's prudent to have a update. Like you write the most detailed update for your major investors, and then you send a variation of that where you may redact some information for all investors. Let's say you have a long tail of micro investors, people who put in $2,500 or something, and maybe you want to include them in the major investor thing, or maybe you don't. Either way, you might want to have two variations, and then you could have a third version, which is for your advisors and your community members, or friends of the business or something like that. So an example would be, maybe you don't want to put your monthly burn in the update that goes to your advisors in your community, but certainly that should go into the update with major investors. And hope you don't mind, I'll be plugging Cabal all the way through this thing, but we make it really easy for you to create groups for these types of people. And so you can send one update out, copy it, send it out to a different list after you redact some things, copy it, and do the same thing. All right. And then what to include. So I'm not sure if Dorina is on the line here. I saw her register from OpenPhone. I work closely with the OpenPhone team. They're S18 YC. I was on the receiving end of their updates. I thought they did an amazing job, so much so that we copied their template and baked it into Cabal, the product. So if you use Cabal and you want to use it for your investor updates, when you use the investor update template, that's from OpenPhone. So shout out to that team. And they kept it super simple and streamlined. They have these sections. So key metrics, that's going to be different for every business. Basically your North Star KPIs. I would suggest having no more than 3 of those. Highlights of the business, lowlights of the business, your financials. This is really the section that investors are they're going to the key metrics in the financial section first. They want to know, like, the financial section tells them, should I be worried about this company? Are they going to run out of cash soon? And the key metrics tells them, are they performing? Product, I highly recommend keeping these to bullet points. Actually, every single section, try to keep it to bullet points. The more narrative, the more like paragraphy it is, the higher the bar is to get your investors to read it. And maybe it's probably taking up a lot of your time too. So my recommendation there. Team would just be any changes, any new hires. Shout outs is super important to call people out for good work. Your investors that actually doing things that you want other investors to pattern behavior off of. And then current focus tells you what you're shooting for next. We had I sent out an email to you all yesterday asking for some questions, things you wanted to cover. And something that came up with a bunch of people was, how do I talk about my lowlights? And I've been here too. There's you don't want to create like negativity in the world about your company, even if things are actually, you had a bad month. You don't really want to project that. You certainly don't want to project that out to like your community and advisors who are sort of at the furthest concentric circle of people who are proximate to your business. So in terms of lowlights, I would keep them somewhat benign. Honestly, I don't think, like, for major issues, you should be broadcasting those out in this format. When major issues come up, my recommendation is you have individual conversations with investors who can help you. And those are the types of things that when you have a board of directors, that's who you should bring it up with, because they're the most invested in supporting you and helping you think through those things. The other people, at the furthest ends, it just causes sort of unnecessary negative energy around your business. And we'll do Q&A at the end so we can get more detailed on that. Okay, so the updates are really a push. The benefit of the updates is creates accountability, creates an operational cadence, but largely it's to the benefit of the investors. You may have noticed in this list, I don't have asks in here. And that's intentional, and I'll get into why in a second. I think of asks as the pull. It's like the update is the give or the push. The ask is I want something from you. I want you to help my business. And there's a lot of things that investors can do, but of course, let's start with some VC bashing because it's always fun. So this meme is a good one. Startups raising money, the VCs pretending like they could be helpful, and then the founder drowns. Sad but true. And again, Cabal's trying to reverse this dynamic. I thought so. Harry Hurst is the founder CEO of Pipe. He had this great thread about, he created this new metric, the check size to helpfulness, which I think is very, very important. You can have like your biggest investor go dark on you, and you can have some tiny investor, somebody who put in like $1,000, be just like relentlessly trying to support you. And you want to lean into that, right? Like, there's ways of addressing the forlorn or abandoned investor, and we can talk about that later. But those people who are just going to go above and beyond to help you, even though they haven't haven't put that much into the business, those are heroes. They're great. You want to like make sure to activate them. Um, and it also shows their like authentic excitement about what you're doing, and maybe to them that small check is relatively a big commitment for them, and that matters. So I think this is a really important concept to be aware of. um, okay, so why should you send out asks to your investors in the first place? There's a few important things to just be like self-aware of. Number one is that your investors shouldn't be in your Slack. They are not a high frequency communication party. You know, they are low frequency, but they should be and could be high impact. Why can they be high impact? For a few reasons. Number one, generally speaking, and this is changing, but generally speaking, investors are like older, maybe they've already had a career in tech, so their network is probably a little higher level rather than being like networked with a bunch of SDRs, maybe they're networked with a bunch of CROs or the equivalent in whatever function that we're in. And they're independent. This is super important. So if your sales rep is trying to sell a prospect, you know, and they're pitching your product, well, the counterparty, the prospect, has their guard up because they know you're selling them. But when that same prospect hears a pitch from your investor, first of all, they're not immediately thinking like, oh, this guy's just trying to sell me because he's, you know, affiliated with the business. They're evaluating how well they know that person, how far they go back. They're generally inclined to listen to the message rather than put their guard up. That's critically important, especially for the sales use case, which we'll talk about more. But that's why these people are so important. And it's not just sales, it's also marketing. Same concept applies, and recruiting. And then finally, they should be really motivated. They've got skin in the game, so they should be motivated to help you with all these things. Cool. ZJ is drawing on the slides. That's awesome. Hey, ZJ. All right. Okay, tactics. A lot of people are like, well, shit, I don't have time to like tell my investors how to help me. It reminds me of that scene from Jerry Maguire where he's like, help me help you. I think that applies for us founders. You need to like synthesize the ask before you send it. The more you do that, the better your results will be. When I say synthesize, that's this pre-process concept. I'll give you some examples. As an investor at Craft, I'll get like an Excel spreadsheet with a list of companies saying, do you know anybody at these companies? Can you make an introduction? To go from that to actually making the introduction is a lot of effort. It's like, I got to check my LinkedIn. I got to cross-reference this list. I've got to write an email. I've got to like, where's the blurb? I don't really know what I'm going to say. I don't know who you want me to introduce you to. If you took it a step further and said, okay, I want you to introduce me to this specific person. Here's an email template of what I want you to send them. They are way more likely to follow through with that. Now that has historically been labor intensive for you to do that, but that's where Cabal will save the day. So what you're seeing down here is a screenshot. This is a real live thing that I did. So Oleg is the founder and CEO of People.ai, YC alum. I had heard that he was prolific in how he activated his cap table. And of course, like being the founder of Cabal, I wanted to talk to him and see what he thought. So I looked him up. This is a screenshot of Cabal. I looked him up on our LinkedIn sync and I saw that Jared was connected to Oleg. Jared was my group partner in the batch. And so I went from this discovery to, we have this email integration where I can just click 2 buttons and then it pings Jared an email. And it says, hey, Jared, I see you're connected to Oleg. Do you know them well enough to make an introduction? And then Jared's like, yes, of course. Jared introduces me. Oleg is obsessed with Cabal. He invests. He's now a design partner with us. And I just greased the skids with Cabal, right? I made it easier on everybody. But that's whether or not you use Cabal, it's just an important thing to be aware of, is that the lower friction you add to the process, the more likely they'll do it. I got this point about excluding asks from updates. People disagree with me on this, but I maintain that asks get buried, and you're turning an email, which is a consumption document, into an action document. And now I'm like, I don't know where to prioritize it in my to-do list, which is my email inbox. Whereas if you just sent a single email that is just directed to me, to one person, and it has the sole request, which is a specific ask, then I'm way more likely to do it. Way more likely to do it. And I'm not on BCC. If you put people on BCC and send out asks, they're going to hide behind the crowd. It's like tragedy at the commons. So a few tips on sending out asks. I don't know if I have this. Yeah, okay. Here's sort of a breakdown. Somebody asked, what are the key things that we should look to our investors to help us with? I think there are four buckets. They're not totally reflected here. Well, three of them are. So selling, helping sell, it's an obvious one, especially if you're a B2B company. Like, your investors should be helping introduce you to prospects. They should help you convert your pipeline by putting in good words with executives at your prospects, with renewals, like all of that. They should be really, like, you should be activating them. So that's mostly B2B. For everybody, marketing is something, of course, your investors should be doing. A lot of people refer to this as signal boosting, but to distribute your message through all of the nodes, which are your investors, creates more resonance in the market. Like, more people have heard of, whatever it is you're doing. I do this pretty frequently with Cabal. If there's some founder out there that tweets about Cabal, I grab that tweet and I push it out via Cabal to my other investors saying, please boost this, and then they'll retweet it. And now it feels like, there's a lot of people talking about Cabal. And again, they should be they should be inclined to do it. Okay, so sales, marketing, recruiting is the other one. Recruiting is very similar concept to sales. You have a pipeline of candidates instead of a pipeline of prospects, but you want your investors to help you fill your pipeline of candidates and also help you convert them. So if you're working on a key hire and you see that one of your investors is first degree connected with that person, they should be helping you sell, of course. Even if they're not, they should be helping you sell. And then the last bucket is advice. So this was the term advisor, literally has the word in it, advice. That was historically what people thought the main contribution of investors and advisors were. I think that's the least important. I think the most important is distribution, which is a combination of sales and marketing, and then company building, which is recruiting. The fourth most important is just advice, and that can come in many forms. It could be like, product reviews, or a peer review on your sales pitch deck, or talking about scaling your engineering team, whatever it is. Just checking in with people on how they would advise you. So yeah, those would be the four main categories. And then someone asked about frequency. I don't want to bombard my investors, and I absolutely agree with that. They'll tune out if you're hitting them up like every day. Even like multiple times a week, I would say, is pushing it, depending upon the size of your cap table and depending upon how involved they are. I try to shoot for like 2 to 3 asks per investor per month. And if I have enough investors or advisors, that's a lot of asks. Like, I'm spreading those out. And then another thing we've done in Cabal is we'll tell you when the last time you hit that person up for a request, so that you're kind of like balancing that out. And if you do it well, you have some amazing outcomes. So Chris I credit him with a lot of the inspiration for Cabal. Chris has not only a long cap table, but he's also got literally hundreds of advisors. He's like done this crazy, really interesting thing with an advisor program. And his quote is, "My investors and advisors have generated millions of ARR, saved us hundreds of thousands of dollars on recruiting fees, and accelerated our category leadership. And I've witnessed this firsthand." It's really awesome. He's like one of those hacker types. So he was like stitching together a million different SaaS apps to make this work. And Cabal is mostly a productization of a lot of his workflows. Okay, let me zip through this last section. Gives is something that nobody really talks about, but it's a push, not a pull. A give helps. It almost like credits your social capital bank a little bit with your investors, so that you can go out with more asks. An example give that I did recently was a swag drop. So we created our first, Cabal swag, and then we gave it out to all of our investors and advisors. Um, Another thing that goes a long way of those, especially the institutional VCs, they're doing their own selling, and one thing they need, just like you need customer use cases or case studies, they need founder testimonials. So if you offer to do a founder testimonial, that's a great give. Hosting an event where your investors can meet each other, that's really cool. That's sort of the last 2 points. Early access to your product, or even engaging them in product feedback is almost like a give. Like people like doing that. So even though you're getting advice out of it, it's sort of like a give. And this first point is that even though they've got skin in the game, just think about it. Humans aren't perfectly rational. It's not like, oh, I invested X dollars, so I must do Y contributions per week. It's more of an emotional thing. So that's why working in gives is pretty helpful. Lastly is monitoring. I think this is kind of like where our industry is heading, which is it's almost like in the same way that you measure your sales team on their hitting their quota. I think you should measure your cap table on how much they're helping your business with those key buckets: sales, marketing, recruiting, and advice. We're building this into our product with an analytics tab where you can see the contributions over time. You can see the top contributors. You can give them like badges for when they're kind of going above and beyond. And here's let's see. Okay, this is kind of merging with the gives thing, but a quick story here. So as you're monitoring people, you want to promote good behavior, like what you want to see out of people. I did this Twitter Spaces thing with Alexis Ohanian is one of our lead investors. Lee's an investor. Max is an investor. Mac is also an investor. He's the founder of Comsor, also an advisor, and Kwasi is an advisor, early user. So we did this Twitter talk. It was awesome. It was great. Had a lot of fun. And then after that talk, I followed up with all of them. And at the bottom here, I said, I'll be sending you a Cabal boost for your help. What that was is a little bit of equity. I gave them, rather than giving them like a bottle of wine or something, I gave them like a few options in Cabal, which is a big part of our whole philosophy as a business, is using your equity as like a tool for growth and recognition and rewarding and all that stuff. But I think, again, it's all this like sort of dynamic of giving and getting and rewarding, and the more you do that, the more engaged your group can be. Okay, so I'm not even sure what time it is. Hopefully it's not, 12:30, great. So we got some good time. Let's do Q&A. So if you wanna go off mute and ask a question or drop it into the chat, I'll be monitoring the chat. And yeah, let's do it. Okay, I'm just gonna go through the chat here because there's already some. So should investor updates only go out from the CEO? They probably should, but they don't have to. Other co-founders are certainly qualified to send out updates. Again, another plug for Cabal is we have a feature where you can have collaborative editing on an email. Imagine like a Google Doc for an email. So what I do is, Fahim is my co-founder. I actually get the leaders of Cabal to all contribute to our investor update. So I use that template, and then I ask our head of design to fill in the product section. I ask Fahim, who's the CTO, to fill in like team and current focus. And then I've got our head of operations who fills in some of our KPIs. And so it sort of just gets compiled, and then I add some flourishes and then send it out. One other little trick there that I recently kind of stumbled upon is I'm starting to write my next month's investor update right after I send my current month's investor update. So you may be asking, like, how the hell can you do that? That's in the future. Well, it's a forcing function. So I kind of draft up what I think is going to happen, like what products we're going to ship, what KPIs we're going to hit, what our burn is going to be, etc. Now I have that draft. Then I the month passes. Now I return to that draft. I can reflect on how close we got to those things, and then also modify it for actuals. and then send it out. And it makes the whole like experience a lot less daunting, and I can just like get it done rather than procrastinate. So that's a little life hack for you all. Okay. How do we get access to Cabal? Well, I'm gonna drop. I'll do that in a second. I'll follow up with this with a link to sign up. I've posted in Bookface before, but I'll share it as a follow up to skip the wait list. By the way, we don't have a wait list because we're like pretentious assholes. It's just because we're still working on our user experience onboarding, and it just doesn't make sense for us to go GA yet. Okay, how do you give away small grants of equity to investors? Many folks' funds can't take advisory shares. That's true, but the gesture of offering goes a long way in and of itself. The first part of the question, how do you do it? That's what that was product number one for Cabal. So the original product of Cabal was helping do these. We call it a modern advisor program. Basically, what that Sendoso guy does, like having hundreds of advisors, and it's pretty easy. You just need to. The way to think about it is be mindful of your ESOP, your stock option pool. You can create a budget within that. So maybe if your ESOP is 10%, maybe you carve out like 50 basis points or 1%. That's your budget for your advisor program. And then on a rolling basis, as you're meeting people who are excited about what you're doing or want to help you, you can offer them small equity grants, very small. And it's almost like it's like a token of appreciation rather than an expectation of future work. But really what you're doing is you're just aligning your advocates with the long-term interests of your business. So I've written a bunch about that on our website, and I'll share some of that. Okay, yeah. How would you deal with investors who are hitting you up too much, typically about their own ideas on the product? Oh God, I love that. First is like just like tell them, frankly. I think that's the best antidote is be like have a frank conversation with them, and they should respect you more for that. If first of all, you don't do it like right off the bat the first time they have some product feedback. But if it's becoming an issue, I would say something like, "Hey, Jill, whatever. Appreciate all your very insightful suggestions on the product. Um, let me share maybe you could like tell them what's on the roadmap for the next few months. We can't keep getting distracted by other things right now. We got to deliver on these bits. So maybe we can check in 3 months and we can talk about like your ideas and how we can incorporate them in our next pass. Something like that. So that would be like the Jedi way of letting them down easy, but that's a real problem. Another thing I should hit on is how to deal with like well, there's two variants of this. One was I had a lead investor, then they left their firm, and then they like assigned me to someone else at the firm that could care less about my business. That's unfortunate, and there's a few ways of handling that. One is, again, being direct, getting that person on the phone and be like, hey, by the way, it doesn't really seem like this is like, in your wheelhouse or something you're very interested in. Is there anybody else at the firm who might be a better, person to be leading the relationship? Which is an uncomfortable conversation, but like you're a founder, you should get comfortable with the discomfort. So that's one method. If they're totally unresponsive, you can't even get them on the phone. One thing you might want to try is like stop sending them updates. They're not responding to you. Why should you be giving them information about your business? And that might like goad them into reactivating. The third most intense option is to look for someone else to buy them out. And this is certainly possible if you're doing great. A lot harder if you haven't hit an inflection point. But I think that should happen more often. Like if someone's not going to pull their weight, if you can get a different person with the same slot on your cap table who's going to work 5 times as hard for you, then hell yeah, you should do that. But yeah, those would be the variants of that. Should I get a Cabal boost for that referral? Maybe. Besides updates, how do you deal with an investor who has put in a very small check but is asking for too much information too frequently? Is there a polite way to say no or refuse to share information? Yeah, it's kind of similar to what I was saying before. It's almost like you're not bluntly saying no. You spend 15 minutes on a catch-up call with them. You indulge them on all their questions and ideas, And then at the end of it, you say something like, hey, we're so heads down right now. I really need to be focused on delivering on these things. Otherwise, we're going to miss our targets. Why don't we set up like a time 3 months from now after the quarter, and we could do another, we could revisit like how we did against, our goals and blah, blah, blah. So, again, it's sort of the polite way of doing that. Is it integrated with email? Do your investors need to use Cabal? Change anything about the behavior they just interact with email? Ella, great question. As being on the receiving end of these, it was critical when we designed Cabal that the receiving party didn't have to log in or sign up or do anything differently. So all Cabal messages are delivered as plain text emails. So the recipient can't tell the difference between you sending them an email versus versus you sending it through Cabal. In fact, Cabal is designed like mail merge, which means no matter how many people you put on the to field, it'll send individual emails to each person, so you can personalize it. So all your emails can say like, hey Jane, hey Joe, here's the update. That's not so great for updates because people know that that's going to a lot of people. But when it comes to asks, if you can personalize the asks and like say their name, they're way more likely to do it. And if it's just a one-on-one email coming from you, it's way, way better than a giant BCC. So yeah, short answer is no, they don't need to do anything. And I don't think Cabal would be successful if we expected them to. And I think there's a lot of products out there that made that mistake. They thought they needed to like create some community products, some social networks, some blah, blah, blah. People don't want to do that. They just want their email. Just put it in their workflow. Do I have a blog with all this information? There's a bunch of good stuff on getcabal.com/learn. We talk about the Modern Advisor Program, how to give out micro grants. We talk about community network effects. One idea that I think I'm really interested in, but it's sort of hard to articulate, is that is the concept of equity trades. So when you're fundraising, this is not it should be a net neutral transaction. You are selling a certain amount of your pie, your equity, in exchange for dollars. So it should be neutral, right? The value of your equity that you're giving them is the value of the dollars that they're giving you. But we kind of like think about it like we just got a bunch of money. It's like, well, you just sold a lot of your business. And I think the more you internalize that concept, like I think it gives you a better feel for the whole dynamic of everything that's going on. And you're doing that same trade with employees when you hire them. If you give them equity, you're giving them equity in exchange for their like activation or contributions. And a big part of Cabal is there's a third group, which is your community. You could do the same thing with on a small scale. You give them small amounts of equity and it should change the relationship. So the equity trade is like the key job of the founder, is how to make the best trades. Okay, how do you handle investors that were super helpful frequently for a while but recently fallen off the radar? I kind of covered this. I think you try to have a check-in call with them and just be blunt, like, hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. Is all good? Would love to have you more involved in the business, and actually like send them asks. And if they're specifically not responding to your asks, then at some point you could just call them out on it. Like, hey, I've emailed you like 10 times in the last few months and I haven't heard back. Like, anything going on? And then if there's some reason, like if they've lost faith in you, then you can downshift into those other paths, which is like stop sending them updates or ask if they would be down to be replaced on the cap table. Yeah, these are all leverage points for you as founders. Okay, what info would you want to keep private to small checks, sub 10K, sub 20K checks? Right now I'm sending all my investors the same update, including the major ones. It's a great question. I'm doing the same thing. So my view is that if someone has invested in the business, then they deserve a lot of information. Now, I expect that will change over time. Let's say there was some M&A event or something like that, or I don't know, some like scandalous thing happened to your business. Well, then I would limit that to major investors. Major being like 4 or 5 parties, generally speaking, like your board. So it kind of depends on where you're at with the business and the sensitivity of the information. Yeah, and it's a lot of gray area, right? It's like there's this thing called information rights, which I've always thought is kind of like a weird, archaic concept. But choosing what you share and don't share, that's up to you, mostly. But the worst thing you could do is just go completely dark on someone who's like very interested in your business and has invested in you. That just is a recipe for problems. Okay, now I flew through a bunch of questions here. 12:42. We've got a few more minutes before we're scheduled to wrap up. Any questions people want to go off mute and ask?
What's the pricing for Cabal?
Great question, Ben. It's free. It's free. So here's our like big master plan. Cabal is free to do most of what I told you about. Where we're gonna charge, which we haven't started yet, is I told you about like that sales use case. We're calling it investor assist. But if we can prove to you that we're influencing pipeline conversion, like by you know facilitating these intros and referrals and all that stuff, then that's where we're gonna like put our business model. We'll probably do the similar thing for recruiting. But most of all the emailing, all the identification of connections through LinkedIn syncing, the modern advisor program, all of that is free, and that's in our interest because it helps with distribution and refining our product. Good question. Anything else? I love this topic, so if you got anything, hit me, like speak up. I'd love to jam on it.
So how does it enable, and then sorry if you talked about it and I just missed it, how does it enable the modern advisor program? Like what part of the mechanics does it handle?
Yeah, so the state of the art pre-Cabal would be like you would get your lawyer involved, you would come up with an advisor agreement that you like reviewed with your attorney. Then you'd have the conversation with the potential advisor. Then you'd have to like, you know, be sensitive of how much you're spending versus your cap table, what you've allocated for your stock option pool. Then you'd send it out via DocuSign. Then you'd have to memorialize it in your cap table through like a board consent, depending upon where you're at. So what we've done is, number one, we have an out-of-the-box advisor agreement that's sort of taken the best practices from all advisor agreements, or you can upload your own. So you don't need to use DocuSign. That's all built in. The budgeting is built in, so you can sort of set aside a number of shares, and you can create we call them tiers, but basically you can set like, you know, gold, silver, bronze, and different amounts, different vesting periods. And that's just for your reference. The advisor wouldn't see that. It's just so you know, like how many of these different levels can I afford given my budget. And then we create this imagine this like nice onboarding flow, like a Gusto style onboarding flow, but for advisors. So it's nifty landing page with your signature and some information, and yeah, and then just, you know, maintaining all the documents, and then we have the Carta compatible and Pulley compatible exports, so you can make sure it gets reflected in your cap table.
Cool. One more quick question. Do any VC firms use it for their LP management? I mean, I'm an YC alum, but I run a VC firm, and we have like mostly founders as LPs, like really successful founders. So like they're like very much, it's like a very similar scenario to what you're describing. Like we don't work with like old school institutionals.
Yeah, totally. That was a delightful thing that we noticed early on, was that we were building for founders, but GPs are founders. They're founders of a firm, and they have their own network. They have a network of LPs and their portfolio founders. And it sounds like in your case, there's some overlap between those two groups. So the product works great for them. We have a lot of firms using Cabal for LP communications, portfolio founder communications. That's how we even have this thing called an offers tab where you can put up custom offers just for your portfolio. So yeah, we'd love to talk to you more about how that works if you're interested. Cool. Yeah, so this will be recorded, and I'll send out the link, and I'll also send out the link to sign up for Cabal, so you can all check it out. But yeah, we'll wrap up. Thank you everyone for attending. Really appreciate it, and hope this was useful. You got my email here. If you got any questions about this stuff, super passionate about this topic, would love to jam with you. So thank you. Talk to you later.